All right, everybody. Hello and welcome to part two, our second session of the Faded Memories Symposium Series. My name is Lucas Livingston. I am really pleased to be here and very pleased to be joined for our second session by Deb Del Signore. I'll introduce for a quick moment, but just firstly, the Faded Memories Symposium Series held in conjunction with the Faded Memories exhibition, an exhibition by artist and art therapist Eric Dean Spruth, and I'm the curator of the exhibition. This exhibition explores concepts around memory and the mutability and mortality of memory, and how we were having a great conversation a couple nights ago with the artist Eric Spruth. If you haven't tuned into that, you can tune into that session, just about how we change our memories, and oftentimes our memories may not be entirely necessarily representative of reality. So you can check out that conversation. But tonight we are joined for part two of our three-part symposium series by Deb Del Signore. Deb and I have a long professional relationship. Deb's a professor of art therapy at the School of the Art Institute, and we've worked closely for so many years, Deb, producing therapeutic arts programming for people living with Alzheimer's and dementia and their care partners, by means of the Arts for Brain Health Coalition based out of Chicago, and through the Art Institute of Chicago, their Once Upon a Time Art in the Moment program. Deb and I also co-authored in 2016, along with our wonderful friend and colleague Jerry Fitterman-Person, a article in the Journal of Museum Education entitled Art in the Moment, Evaluating a Therapeutic Wellness Program for People with Dementia and Their Care Partners. And we also co-presented at the Association of Midwest Museums and the Deb, I'm sure there's a lot of wonderful, incredible things I can introduce about you that don't involve me. Incredibly, that's what's really on the at my fingertips here. So. Deb, I'm really happy to have you be here. Thank you so much, and looking forward to your presentation and our conversation. And yeah, certainly this is a pretty casual thing. If we very much welcome everyone to chit chat in the chat box, and if anybody has any questions, whether through Zoom or through Facebook Live, we'll get to those towards the end. Have a Q&A, but definitely, Deb, happy to hand things over to you and get this rolling. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks, Lucas. Wow, that was a great introduction. You reminded me of things. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here, Lucas. It's great to be a part of this Faded Memories series that you've put together with Eric, and is it John that's coming soon? Is that?
Yes, right.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, John Kay will be joining us
right.
Tomorrow night, exactly the same location, same time. Well, different location. But yeah, John will be speaking to us through through Indiana University. He'll be addressing creativity later in life, and lifelong arts and creativity, and just the healthful benefits of artistic expression, and I just, the way I'm envisioning what he's talking about through the little description of what he said, it's almost to an extent like the idea of scrapbooking for memory, or creative output as a way of harnessing one's memories and life as well. So yeah, looking forward to that. Yeah.
Great. That's exciting. So I think everybody on this call, so welcome. I'm excited to see your names. And I also recognize too that I'm going to be talking about art therapy and creativity in the brain and its intersection with memory. And as Lucas has already mentioned, the intersection specifically with people who are living with dementia. whether they are the people who have the diagnosis of some form of dementia, or the many people in their lives that that impacts, whether that's a family member or a professional caregiver, friends, you name it. I think dementia is definitely something that many of us, it's touched our lives personally. So I invite this to be as interactive as you'd like. I typically run programs that are more like workshops where I'm working with the people in the room. So I encourage that back and forth. And I know that at least in this Zoom space right now, I know that there's a lot of intelligence and knowledge around the subject. So please jump in and add to it. It can only enrich this presentation. So thank you. So Lucas said sort of a bit about me, is especially like my work in the museums, but I am an art therapist, and I've been practicing for over 20 years. And my practice has been predominantly working with older adults. And a subsection within that has been working with people who have dementia. And so for the purposes of today, although I have pretty extensive experience working in skilled nursing facilities, working with a creative arts therapy team, working in activities departments and dementia care units, et cetera, I'm really going to hone in today a lot of like what Lucas was talking about in my museum practice, and really consider like what can be done within gallery spaces to address and be with and share space with folks whose memories, like explicit memories, may be difficult to sort of touch. So, okay, let's see if I can figure out how to move this slide. Here we go. So today we're just going to cover kind of like basic stuff, but I really hope that this can facilitate some dialogue either in this space tonight or maybe in your conversations with others beyond today. So we're going to talk about what art therapy is. We're going to sort of consider what is creativity and maybe who's allowed to be creative in our society, and what impact that has maybe on people feeling that they can engage in this hopefully very accessible and it's like being creative is being human. And so sometimes it's a bit of a shame when people feel like they can't connect with that creativity and they're not allowed to because of the messaging in our society. So, and then I'm going to move into some of the health benefits related to engaging in the arts, specifically visual arts. We're going to talk about looking at art and making art. There's a lot of overlap in the brain health impact that might have. And then I'm just going to share with you a little bit more in depth my practice in art in the moment that Lucas has mentioned, which is where you can really see in real time or in real, when we're in these groups, you can really see the impact of being around art. So, okay, and I encourage any sort of questions as we go throughout. So for those of you who are not aware, art therapy, this is the definition from the American Art Therapy Association of what art therapy is. I'm just going to read it. Art therapy is an integrative mental health and human services profession that enriches the lives of individuals, families, and communities through active art making, creative process, applied psychological theory, and human experience within a psychotherapeutic relationship. So it's a lot of words. I would say that I agree with this for the most part. I would say that I think that the art therapy can be practiced in so many different settings and in so many different ways. We're just, the practice of art therapy is sort of expanding. And what I love about that expansion is that ultimately what happens is it begins to intersect much more with other disciplines. And I think that the more we work across disciplines, the more beauty and the more discovery we can find. And so I really, my own practice, I really enjoy working across disciplines. My work with Lucas is a perfect example of that. Some people ask, like, what's the difference between art therapy and like just arts and healthcare? Arts and healthcare has, if you just Google that, and we can find lots and lots of artists that are working within healthcare settings. And, I would say that there is so much overlap between the two, but if we had to sort of pull out what the differences are, I would say that a lot of times, and please jump in, I know people on this call, I'd love to have a dialogue around this, but participatory arts are generally, the goal is to have fun and connect, it's enjoyment, it's a way to sort of find self-expression and discovery, maybe there's opportunities for learning, and it certainly is therapeutic and can have a therapeutic effect that has been shown across the board, especially through like Gene Cohen's work. I think we can begin to think about what is therapeutic. Therapeutic can be on so many different levels of domains of being, and certainly in preventative measures, which we'll talk a little bit about as we go forward. Arts therapies or art therapy in general, it's at the core, it's very relational. It's within a therapeutic relationship between the artists, the art therapists, the artworks, and then the art process. It can be fun, and it's a mean for self-discovery, education, and expression, but it's primarily at its core designed to be therapeutic. The purpose is to express clients or people's express needs or reasons for entering into that therapeutic relationship. And then there's a change. Like the goal is that we will see some sort of change or a shift in self or a shift in community. So our therapists can work with individuals and also work in larger groups as within community, and bring a lot of the art therapy lens to those settings. Whereas, but I would say that my work in a museum, I wouldn't say that the goal, I'm not creating therapeutic relationships with folks. I'm using that lens and that knowledge and bringing those into spaces to try to sort of see and collectively co-create the change that we want to sort of see, either in the moment or much larger in society. I often use my practice in ways to facilitate dialogue around ageism and ableism, especially as it intersects with aging. I often quote Ellen Dissanayake, and she's like an anthropologist, sort of she studies creativity and sort of the like where it all, like what's sort of the foundational, what is creativity and why does it exist? And I like this quote from her because I think that it sort of helps me really think about that because of the intersection of arts and aging, and which comes with ageism, I think a lot of times when artists and art therapists or people come and begin to try to make art with older adults, there's a lot of like, let's make everybody happy and get that smile off your face. And it's just, there's a infantilizing piece of this. And this is sort of a reminder that the arts can be much more than just having fun. Having fun is awesome. And hopefully that is a big part of the process, but giving a form to feeling is a way of managing and controlling it. So that although the painting may be horrifying or the dance or the performance of whatever modern thing it is that we see, there's a kind of cathartic, or at least a feeling that has been somehow held or contained and therefore can be approached and dealt with. So making can be a way for us to address what we want to address in maybe a way that we might not have done it before. And it doesn't have to be always this pleasure activity. But as I'll talk about a little bit later, there are some sort of neurotransmitters firing in our brains that actually do stimulate sort of pleasure principles in our experiences. Creativity. Who has the capacity to be creative? A lot of times when we're talking about dementia and arts and dementia, there's sometimes a dialogue around, well, when people get dementia, they get tapped into this creative part of themselves, and all of a sudden they can make art. And I'm not saying that that's not true, but is that universally true? I think that we need to sort of consider that. Also, on the other hand, on the other side, there's a lot of assumptions around people's abilities. Once there's a cognitive disability in place, like what are we assuming that people cannot be creative? So there's this great article. It's this is the title of the article, Broadening the Debate on Creativity and Dementia, Critical Approach, Bilas, from 2018. And this is really sort of beginning to break down what does it mean to be creative, especially around the assumptions of, well, that, you know, my mom can't talk anymore. How can she engage in anything that's creative? And so in this article, they really break down what the C's are. A big C is, and I think that the talking about it in this way makes the idea of creativity approachable. If I were running a more of an interactive presentation right now, I would be asking everybody, like, do you believe that you are creative? How does it feel when you are asked that question? Are you creative, or are you an artist? Taking it sort of to this other level. I think a lot of times there's a lot of emphasis and a lot of praising of the big C's and the pro C's. So the big C is any act or product that changes an existing domain or that transforms an existing domain into a new one. So like we're talking like Einstein, we're talking, Picasso or Kandinsky, or people who like really shifted or turned their field on its head. And those are the people we revere, and those are the people that are creative and are artists and are put in museums and put in the history books. And then the pro C are people, it's like it's a creativity that has the potential to leave a short-term legacy. So maybe if you write a book and creates like great dialogue in society, but maybe like 100 years from now, we might not be talking about that book anymore. A little C, and this is where I think we should begin to like hone in and really be focused on, especially when we're working with people who maybe don't identify as artists. How can we really remind people that we are creative, and being creative is part of being human and basically how we can get through the world? So the little C is the creative practices that are unlikely to have any enduring legacy, but are nonetheless meaningful in the context of everyday lives, such as making a new addition to a recipe or creating a humorous anecdote. So we do that on a daily basis. Like, oh, I'm going to add some cinnamon to this recipe and see what happens. And then voila, it's the new secret ingredient. And then the mini C's are these creative acts that happen almost within the person that people might not even ever really recognize outside of that person. I know that I have, I used to work with this man, an older adult who had pretty extensive neuropathy in his hands, and he had difficulty buttoning his shirt. And I remember one day he came up to me and was like, look what I designed. And he designs this little gadget that helped him button his shirt. And it was actually this great creative act that assisted him in this like newly acquired disability of his. And it brought a lot of pride, and it was definitely something to celebrate. And then another one from Disignaki. I say there is this impetus to make ordinary reality extraordinary. And that is the idea that she's saying that we all have it in us to do this little added extra thing, to be changing our world always. Even if it's just choosing a new combination of an outfit. Yeah. Okay, are there any questions or thoughts or dialogue or discussions you want to have about what I've said, or anything you disagree with? Anybody?
Deb, I like the idea of, what's creativity and who's who's creative. Sometimes I feel people ask me, "Oh, Lucas, are you an artist?" And I was like, I sometimes I don't feel sure of myself to respond, yes, I am, because I don't, I don't paint. Don't, I don't draw regularly. And I don't say, okay, now I'm going to take some time out of my schedule to make art. I don't do that. But then I think it's almost the question's kind of a non-starter in a sense, in that there is creativity in all of us, and in every aspect of what we're doing every day. I heard you say once too, to a packed audience, something about like the way we would choose to curl our hair in the morning or something. In that sense, it's a way of expressing ourselves fundamentally, and that's what making art's all about. So
Right.
that's beautiful.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, and I think that Rollo May, I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he wrote a book in the mid 70s called The Courage to Create. And he wrote a book and he talked about sort of this, it's really important on like a larger social scale that we're all being creative, because we can move ourselves collectively into a different space, perhaps a better space, perhaps a more just space, and we all are responsible for contributing to this. But it's sort of this jump, this courage to kind of take the step into expression is sometimes the hardest piece. But if we can get there, there's I think maybe like artists and art therapists who have worked with people for many years, like I think that we've seen in our own selves and in the people that we're working with, sort of the shifts that happen just by making some art. So let's see. So I'm just going to kind of go through some sort of brain connected intersections with making and actually art looking as well. But with art making, we're stimulating so many, like holistic full body, can have a holistic full body impact. Because we use our bodies, we use our minds, it's like our motor systems, we're using our hands, we're moving around to get supplies, somatosensory pathways, we're sensing, we're feeling, like I like this picture. This is a picture of a woman who has really late stage dementia, sort of really accessing and feeling this painting that she's doing and really using her hands, and it's a very sensory experience. Also, we're using our eyes. A lot of times when we're looking at art or making art, sometimes I've seen this a lot of times where sort of we break through into this field of feeling, this affective experience in our limbic system. It's activated. And the cognitive symbolic system as well. So we can also really engage on a really complex level and think about things really concretely or abstractly as well as we make art. So I have this sort of the statement from Saffer and Press that individual expressive styles may emphasize one or more of systems over the other, which leads me into this. I'm just going to share briefly this expressive therapies continuum. This is sort of a way to conceptualize different, it's a way to conceptualize what type of art to make, for what particular reason, what materials to use, what processes to engage in. And it was initially conceptualized by a woman with the last name of Lusbrink in 1978. And it was recently in 2009 by Hinz. She wrote a book that really, it's a great framework through which to work and to really think about really how how we use our minds and how art intersects with that. And these are sort of the different, I'm going to go through this. It's pretty complex, but this is sort of the basic level of understanding of this. And this is that there are 3 different levels of two like binary ways of exploring materials and concepts. And the idea is that at the base of this is generally speaking, we as individuals sort of like perceive our world maybe on these different levels. And we can get stuck in one level and maybe need to stimulate the one like on the left side. If we're over identifying one on the left side, then maybe we need to sort of maybe explore what's happening on the right side. So at the very basic, it's kind of in a developmental level. And even though it's kind of hierarchical, we all kind of engage with these. We can all be engaging with these at all times. But this idea of kinesthetic creativity versus sensory. So like moving our bodies, really sort of engaging the body in the process. And at the other level is really like sort of sensing our world around us. This is actually a great entry point for people who are maybe more progressed in their dementia. We might begin there with some movement or with some sensory stimulation to begin to maybe activate, like we might activate the senses to then move into the kinesthetics. At the next level is perceptual versus affective. So this is like how we concretely sort of perceive the world. And at the other end is like how what we perceive is like how are we feeling, how are we being emotionally impacted, how are we going through the world feeling, or are we going through the world in more concrete, like this is what I see and it's very sort of concrete. At the next level is cognitive versus symbolic, which we can get into really complex thinking and complex processes in the creative process. And this, you know, this was designed around visual arts, but I've read and seen a lot of people from different creative arts really using this as a tool. And then the top level is sort of this creative level. Again, it's not really hierarchical, but the idea is that if we're sort of in this creative state at this creative level at the top, there's potential to sort of be sort of exploring all of these as we're creating. So hopefully that makes sense, but this is definitely a tool that I use definitely in the museum work too, and in all of my work working with people with dementia for sure, and really people who don't have dementia. I think we all can sort of benefit from this. Okay, Louise, I just saw your comment, but I'm quite sure intergenerational art offers both.
Yes. Should I interrupt?
Sure. Yes, please. I've been waiting for an interruption.
What I meant to say was both you could say the left and right, like, so the kids are less constrained by, you know, symbolic stuff or cognitive stuff, and maybe more likely to engage on the so-called left side and those two sides together, and offers the older adult an in that they wouldn't have otherwise.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's great. And these are left side, right side functions of our brain. So it also allows us to stimulate the different hemispheres of our brain as we're sort of, the symbolic and the affective and the sensory are on one side, and the cognitive is, going to be a little bit on the other. And then I forgot what I was going to say. And also along these lines too, like the kinesthetic and the sensory level is sort of the brainstem part of our brain. The middle is the limbic, and the top is more the cortical part of our brains as well. So it's also like just stimulating different. There's just, when we're working with people and within communities, we can really kind of be thinking about like, where do we want people to kind of be sitting and exploring in this space right now? And so then that might impact the type of materials we share with people, or what the activity is that we bring into those spaces. And I love this idea around intergenerational, really thinking about this maybe on a developmental level. And also like, I think on a developmental level, I think that's, Louise, I feel like that's what you're talking about. Okay, could I talk a little bit more about the perceptual affective continuum? Sure. So Oops, sorry, I keep, sorry, everybody. Okay. Yeah, so I would say I use this a lot. And at the same time, like this, this approach and this theory and this, there's been so much brain imaging, and it's been gotten really deep into the neurology of this, the bioneurology of these experiences. So I say that to say that although I use this a lot, I'm not like an expert. If you're interested in this, check out Hintz's work. It's pretty incredible. So the perceptual and affect, like an example of that would be, I mean, at a really simple level, the affective would be exploring your emotions. So like, why don't we draw, use these materials to, it might be abstract, but like to draw what you're feeling right now. And then the other hand would be what's like more like what you're, how you're perceiving your world to be. And so if you're focused a little bit too much on like, it's cold, or I'm trying to think of an example. If you're focused too much on like something really concrete, then you might not be able to really access your emotions, or your emotions, or that limbic level. There's like a protective component to the perceptual versus the affective, protecting from sort of this level of feeling. So if we notice that people are avoiding their emotions, we might want to sort of, explore that with them a little bit. And we can do that by, choosing materials. So like perceptual might be something that's really concrete, like a pencil, like draw this specific thing. And then affective might be like pastels or something a little bit more fluid, and more just like color-based. And then when we get up into cognitive, it's a little bit more like multi-stepped. So there would be like collage might be like, there's so many steps in collage. You have to cut out the pieces, choose them, arrange them, glue them, there's a lot of different steps. Whereas lower on the scale, it's like sensory and kinetic, you just use your body. But the next one, you begin to use tools. Okay. And I can certainly share with y'all like an article about this too. So, okay. Yeah, okay, Louise, I'm reading your thing. It says left side, right side is not as clean, as divided as we might like to think. Both sides are engaged at all times in all activities. Might be useful to think of it as what processes are being permitted by the boss, which is the frontal cortex. Louise, I'm so glad you're here. And then, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't there now studies or science out there that's saying that even as we age, that divide, whether it was there before or not, is even less of a clean divide, that we're sort of accessing the brain more holistically the older we get? Is that?
I think that's fair. If nothing else, there's a greater division of responsibilities. As we start losing cognitive function, we tap whatever we have residual and make the most of it. So yeah, it need not necessarily be as clean.
Got it. Yeah, I'm glad. I really like the way. I thank you for sharing that. That's great. Okay, I'm looking at the time. Okay. Okay, so this is, where does the creative process intersect with mental health? I'm sure a lot of people are really aware of this. Stuckley and Noble talk, a lot of their research is in loneliness. This is a quote from one of their articles from the 2010, engagement with creative activities has the potential to contribute toward reducing stress and depression and can serve as a vehicle for alleviating the burden of chronic disease. The chronic disease can be very much impacted by cortisol. Again, I'm not a neurologist, but there has been Camille Ray and Munez, this is an art therapist. They've done some studies where, and they're not the only people that have I think they took I think in this thing, they took swabs of people's mouths to see what the cortisol levels were before and after just 45 minutes of making. And that there was a significant decrease in cortisol levels after making. And that was regardless of gender and age, and also people's like if they identify as an artist or not. So it didn't matter that people didn't necessarily need to get into like this state of flow, which I'll talk about in just a second. Not that we all can't experience that, but usually a really deep dive into this idea of flow might happen with people who are more practiced in making. And then I pulled this quote, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later too, is that viewing art creates the same chemical response as love. So we're triggering the feel-good chemical of dopamine. There have also been studies that have also from Ellen Desniecki has said that while you're making, oxytocin gets released in your body, which is the same chemical that's released, that's passed from a mother to a child through breastfeeding, which it sort of builds trust, which again can impact cortisol levels in the brain, in the body. So there's like neurological, neurotransmitting, like chemical shifts that are happening, and I think more and more people are studying this. So I'm just naming a couple here, but if you just do a search of this, there's a lot of people that are studying this now. So this was sort of this idea of flow. It's a holistic sensation that people feel when they act with total involvement. I don't know how to say this man's name. I've heard him speak a couple times. I'm just gonna let you read it. He's been studying flow from like the early 1990s. He was really somebody who, and really sort of this idea that the state of flow can be accessed through arts, through making. It's a complete absorption in the activity. It produces an altered sense of time and a release of vital energy. Anybody who's made art for any period of time, this is why I became an art therapist, is that I would go into my studio in the mornings and I would like lose complete track of time, and it would be like 6-7 hours later and I'd realize I hadn't eaten. Like I had so much energy after being in the studio of making, and I just was like, what is going on? I actually changed my major to psychology after having more and more experiences like that. I got really interested in what was happening to me internally while I was making. So yeah, so it's also really great for concentration. It's like it's just like an intense focus. Rollo May was talking about this in the 70s as well. Oh, okay. Chixie, that's how we say it, Chixie. Thank you. Okay. Our social lives. It's also really important. I mean, when we get into the research around dementia, being social is really key. People who are able to maintain opportunities for socialization, they do well. It's good for us all to be social. We're social beings. Making, especially when we're making in groups, making is very conducive to being in groups. Artists suffer less loneliness and depression than the general population. This is what the Research Center for Arts and Culture have said. Mature artists or highly functioning members of society are twice as likely to do volunteer work than others. And in this really landmark study by Gene Cohen, which I know, I'm sure a lot of people are very aware. It's kind of an older study now, but it was such an exciting moment when his work first came out. And he looked at 1 hour of arts engagement a week for people. I think the average age, it turned out, was like 87 years old. And these people that participated in the study, they were either making jewelry or they were singing in a choir. It was like very active, engaged making and engagement in the creative process. And there were control groups where people were doing more traditional activities that didn't really engage the creative process, but there was a really significant difference in improved self-esteem, well-being, physical health, increased civic engagement. So we see this a lot too. I've seen this so much in my work, is that as people engage in the making, and maybe it's because of sort of these social, like the social impact that it has, but people tend to get more involved. They get more involved in their communities. Again, I'm not making a generalization, but I guess I'm saying that I've seen this happen. And it's very real. And I think it's, you know, a lot of people would come to my thing and just was like, it's so great just to accomplish something. There's this sense of purpose and coming together. So this next thing, I'm just going to sort of name that the creative process intersects with certain psychological developments. These are just some older, or some psychological developments that sort of look at life past early adulthood. Again, Gene Cohen at the bottom of this, he really, he was really looking at how once we reach a certain level of psychological development in our life, we're actually primed to really engage in the creative process. Yeah. So maybe miserable, depressed people are drawn to the arts in the form of self-medication. Yeah, Louise, you said that. So maybe miserable, depressed people, your students are drawn to the arts as a form of self-medication. Yeah, I mean, as a person working in a art school, I think that's certainly something that is thought about. I don't know if there's been a lot of, I'm not familiar with research around this, but it's kind of an interesting idea.
That was in response to Lucas commenting on how he had seen that art students are more depressed than non-art students.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we do see. So I can't name a research thing, but I know that there's a lot of talk about that. And we do see that at art schools. So
can I ask another question?
Yes, please.
Just curious whether art students or anyone, do you find that it's typically still the case that people think that misery creates an artistic proclivity? Something about misery that puts one in a space where you can be more creative, do better work, or to disabuse people of that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, but I certainly have heard that, you know, artists naming that it's from these dark places, or they have to sort of pull from these places to find their inspiration. But I don't know the answer to that.
Fair enough.
But, yeah.
I'll chime in there, maybe not that misery necessarily fosters creativity, but a whole nother aspect of my professional studies is in the history of drinking culture. And there's a long established belief in throughout, especially East Asian and Chinese, especially lore and culture, that inebriation fosters creativity. And so I don't know, I think there's probably some sort of like great trifecta there with creativity, inebriation, and misery, just all feeding off of one another in some respects.
Yeah, and like this idea of self-medication as well, you know. I mean, I certainly have a lot of art therapy students come to us and they share their stories of how the arts have impacted them and sort of shifted their lived experience in ways that made it more manageable. And so that they wanted to study why and come learn more about it and try to sort of share that experience with others. So I think we talk a lot about that as art therapists, especially with our therapists in training. It's like how, it's really important for us to understand how art has influenced us or impacted our own well-being. Not that that's a universal experience of like how art might impact one person, might impact another person in a different way, but just having that lived experience of this is my relationship to my art, this is how my art impacts me on all these different neurological levels even, and certainly emotional, physical levels as well. So. Yeah, Andy, I'm reading your statement here. Misery is related to misery. My thought is that we have hard feelings that need to be expressed. And if given an outlet and the tools, that expression can be artistic. Some people express their pain in a journal, some turn it into poetry, a poem, a song, etc. Yeah, I think art making serves a purpose for sure. So there have been studies now as well, which I don't think we're around too much when I first started this, but really sort of the impact of looking at art has on our brains, that it triggers parts in our brain that are related to pleasure. If we see a piece that really sort of speaks to us, it can mimic feelings of love and pleasure. So, I mean, I was talking kind of broadly about the impact of art making and art looking on the brain, and to sort of bring this back into memory, because we didn't really talk too much about memory, is really just this idea that using these techniques and really considering the impact that art looking and art making can have on individuals, whether we have dementia or not, can be really powerful and really like connecting and help folks communicate. And we've just seen in Lucas can attest to this too, is just a lot of doors opening when we're in the gallery spaces, and a lot of doors opening when we're making with folks, even people who maybe haven't spoken much, used words in a long time, find words in the galleries while we're looking at the artwork. So this is just art in the moment. I think that maybe started in 2009, perhaps. And I have some images here from the last time we met. It was a program that was started by the Art Institute and CJE Senior Life. And we managed to sort of keep it going for over a decade. And we saw so many groups come through, hundreds of people. And it's totally based on the Meet Me at MoMA program in New York. And this is just an example of us in the gallery space one day that we were there, and this idea of bringing a group of people. And I love this picture too, because it is very intergenerational. We have a bunch of students and alumni in here as well from the art therapy program. We have a professional caregiver, we have family members, and then also folks who are living with the diagnosis of dementia as well. For those of you who are not aware, again, we're pulling this pretty much directly from the Meet Me at MoMA program, but the
You're muted, Deb, but I can see.
okay.
There you go.
Oh, yeah, I don't know. I was just kicked off, but then I came back.
Thank you.
Thank you for letting me know you could still see me, or you could see that I was back. Okay, I'm gonna go back to this. All right, can you see that? Okay. Yeah, so we look at the painting or the image for 30 to 60 seconds, which is a long time, but the idea is that we can get everybody kind of focused in on one image together, and we talk about the formal elements. We talk about what colors do you see, or actually we sit in silence, and then we go into the description, and really like formal elements type of stuff we're looking at. How do you think this was made? Like, how would you describe the brushstrokes? What colors do you see? What shapes do you see? And then we begin to sort of open it up. So this beginning level, it's kind of hard to get people to just really focus in, but I found that it's really an important part of this. It brings us all into the same space, almost like symbolically, but quite literally as well. And then from there, we move into more interpretation. What do you think's happening in here? What's the mood here? And then we begin to try to connect people. The goal of the Art in the Moment program really is to connect people on like a social level, and it is to have fun and to have whatever conversations come up. We've had conversations about death and dying. We've had discussions about parties and celebrations, ideas around like conceptual art, or like what if you had an object that would like symbolize you, what would that be? And sort of like sometimes like sort of complex questions, but also like, what's this connection to your own life? And it's a lot of repeating what people say, and people can participate at any level. So sometimes people are sitting in the gallery space and their contribution is a or a ha, or it's just noises. And so I'll repeat those noises. I'll say, Joe just said, ha, 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 so everybody becomes included. And then later on, we find that sometimes Joe finds a word, and it's pretty powerful what can happen in those spaces. Yeah, the silence is really hard, but I think it's really important in the beginning. So, okay. And then this is sort of more of what I was talking about, sort of like different ways that we can elicit the conversation and keep the conversation going. These are some more pictures that we have. Lucas put together this great program that was 3D art. And so he made 3D replicas of the art that we were looking at in the museum so that people could actually touch it and bring it close and really have an idea, maybe a better idea through this sensory touch. So if we think back to the expressive therapies continuum, this is a great example of bringing kinetics, passing an object around, and then having people actually be stimulated by the object that's being passed around. And then we move into different levels of how does this make you feel? What do you see? How does this make you feel? And then we get into more complex brain functioning of like, what does this remind you of? Does this, what does this make you think about? What might this symbolize? So we kind of use that same format in the galleries as well. And then we move into hands, we make some art together. We either go back to the studio space and make art. Sometimes we make art in the gallery. This piece down here, that's the Picasso red armchair. We made little coasters in the gallery spaces so we could be looking at the art again with so like the memory of the piece is right there. It's in the moment, and we could make in that space. And we've also made a lot of collective things like these. We did a whole series on sound, and so we went back to the studio and we made art. Yes, multi-sensory for sure. And we wrapped sticks and we made these wind chimes with messages written on them that we wanted to send out into the world. Basically, the art making is designed in a way to connect to the theme that we're looking at in the gallery space, but also it's art that people can access or enter at whatever level they want to or are able to on any given day. So these are just some ideas of ways that art therapists can work within museums. And yeah, I think that this idea of working within the museum education, like knowledge and department and community and connecting with art therapy is a really wonderful way that we can maybe connect with individuals and the public in ways that we can really consider and think about care and community care together, sort of as a group. A lot of times people are very isolated in their experiences with dementia and various other mental health challenges or cognitive challenges. And I think that the art museum is such a beautiful place to normalize these conversations and this socialization. So, okay, we've got about 5 minutes left. So I just want to open it up to any questions or thoughts people had about what we talked about today.
Yeah, Deb, I love it. Kind of just right there at the end in terms of the art making projects that you mentioned, that they're they're structured in a way that they're approachable and accessible for people, regardless of their their cognitive level or their physical dexterity and such. I mean, that reminds me, you said that you don't want to set people up for failure, right? To create these like complex tasks that require multiple layers of complex step-by-step comprehension and such. And so, I mean, at the same time, you're not just giving them rudimentary like crafts or such. I mean, so you still challenge them and challenge people to come to these kind of moments of revelation through the hands-on art making process, much as we would do in the conversations in the gallery.
For sure. I like that you brought it back to that, because I think that's what I try to replicate, is sort of the where's that entry point for everybody? You know, even if it's just like, I'm gonna hold the pens. I'm gonna hold all the pens, you know, and that could become like, we can work with that, and that can be part of people's creative expression, right? So, and Andy asked, when the participants are making, are they encouraged to respond to the piece discussed? For example, can they express or can they create something that responds to the color, to the content? So typically what I do is I have a specific directive, and I try to provide opportunity for meaning making in that activity. So for instance, we did one that was like the Wonder Year. So it was about being childhood. And we brought, I brought little sticks or I think they were clothespins for people to wrap. And we talked a lot about, like, if you could give a message to your younger self, what might it be? And so people are paired up. So maybe that it will just be like a conversation that would have between two people, or maybe people would choose the color of the yarn that they want to wrap and make these little people out of. But they're sort of like, I try to infuse it with meaning, but if somebody just wants to wrap like one piece of string around something, like, that's wonderful, you know? So it is in relationship to the pieces we looked at in the theme, but I don't want to set people up to have to rely on their memory to remember what it is that we just looked at, if that makes sense. So there's just it's just a lot of acceptance. It's an opportunity for us to just create.
Yeah, I think I definitely still have a 2 or 3 of the art projects that we produced over the years. Some of those things on maybe on the shelf right behind me. So these are just interesting keepsakes to myself too, that I look at them and I reflect and I remember the great experiences that we had together in the museum. But at the same time, I like the point you make too about art therapy is not just all about showing people pretty pictures and putting a smile on their face, right? Likewise, psychological therapy, you're going to encounter really challenging, difficult moments of revelation and breakthroughs and such. And so, I don't know if you can comment on that aspect of art therapy as well, and just how it's beyond the idea of working with people with dementia, but how art therapy is also as a therapeutic process used to really tackle like grief and other harrowing experiences. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a tool that that some people could benefit from. You know, some people, for some people, it's great to engage in this creative process to make sense of their lives and make sense of what's happening. And yeah, I mean, I would say that, I mean, everybody's experience in art therapy is different. And also everybody practices art therapy differently. And a lot of times we're also utilizing other approaches that are more traditionally like talk therapy. Like there's ways to incorporate like cognitive behavioral therapy into the art therapy process, for instance, or do more somatic based foundational approaches, but we incorporate the creative aspects in the body into that process as well. And I would say that certainly folks, I wouldn't say that I'm not working at that level with people with dementia as well, no matter really what their level. Certainly like earlier in stages where we're really sort of working through like this diagnosis. But a lot of times too, we're working maybe on a really like on an emotional level. And so we can use those materials to address, ill-being, or to sort of like mitigate and explore the emotions people are feeling in the moment.
Mm-hmm. No, I think it's really interesting too, just because 2 nights ago we had for part 1 of our Faded Memories Symposium Series, we had Eric Dean Spruth, another art therapist, discussing, and tonight with you, an art therapist. So it just shows the tremendous breadth of what art therapists do in their practice. I mean, Eric working with incarcerated, mentally ill patients in the criminal justice system, and yourself working with individuals with Alzheimer's, with dementia, and other aspects as well. And so it's just, I think it's truly interesting, showing the diversity of art therapy practice and applications as well.
And I think it just speaks to when engaging in the arts can make a difference. And I would certainly say it's not just the visual arts, and I think Louise is making a comment here. I was caught by the comment about art favoring the visual sense. How can we cross sensory disability boundaries? And I think that certainly that's something that we're always assessing. And again, it's kind of like access, how can we utilize sound? I think also like art can be art. I mean, there's performance art, there's sound art. There's so many different like ways to be creative, and to really kind of it's hard to define what art is. I think the deeper you get into, or at least the deeper I get into my practice, like I was saying with the holding of the pencils, what is expression? So
and I
Louise,
mean,
I just saw that Louise had unmuted herself.
Thanks for that. I was just thinking that if there's, it's not only catering to each person's need, but how can we help a visually impaired person understand the world through a hearing impaired person's sense? If you touch something, can you create a visual product that relates to what you felt? Can you create an auditory product that relates to what you felt? We haven't even touched smell yet, but that could be part of the picture too. It's just using art as a means of breaking down boundaries and helping people understand each other.
It's beautiful. Yes, absolutely. And of course, like smell is, actually wrote my thesis about including smell in the art therapy process with people who have dementia. So it's like really kind of fascinating where, where smell impacts our brain and where it's processed, and also sort of this idea of people losing their sense of smell as dementia progresses too. So, but I love that, and it's, to me, that makes me think a lot about empathy and like understanding and connection across different lived experiences, even along those lines of disability, or maybe especially.
Well, I think we're a little over time here.
We're a little over.
everybody's time. This conversation has been so great. My goodness. Wow. All right. Well, certainly if anybody has any follow-up questions, you can toss them into the on Facebook. Hopefully this video will live on, or otherwise certainly you all tuning in probably know how to get in touch with us. So, but thank you so much, Deb, for being part of the Faded Memories Symposium, for sharing your expertise and your enthusiasm with us. This has been really great. It's great seeing you again. It's been a long time due to the coronavirus, of course. But definitely looking forward to future collaborations. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Thank you, Amy, Louise, Eric, everybody tuning in and enjoying our chat room. And we hope to see you tomorrow night, everybody. Tune in at the same time with a different Zoom link. If you don't have the Zoom links, you just, the easiest thing, you go to ancientartpodcast.org. I'll put that in the chat as well. The ancientartpodcast.org, and then click on the events section, and you'll find the Facebook event for that. So thank you again, everybody, and really looking forward to future conversations. Thanks, Deb. Everybody be well, be safe, and have a great rest of your evening. All right.
Thanks so much.
Pleasure. Take
Bye,
care.
everyone.